So the evening is in two parts, part before tea break and the part after tea break. And before tea break, I'm going to introduce you to a Buddhist text. And I'm going to introduce it by simply reading it. So it's just a few words about the text first and then about the reading. The text is an early Mahayana Sutra. I'll say more about the Mahayana later. But it's called the Prachupana Buddha Samukhavastita Samadhi, which means, I'll just get the translation of that now. The meditation in which the Buddhas of the present all stand before one. So that's what the text is called. And I'm just going to read it really. We're going to do a little silent meditation, short silent meditation. Then I'm going to read the first chapter, quite slowly. And then we'll have another short meditation. And I'll read the second chapter, which is a bit longer than the first chapter. The first chapter is called The Questions. And the second chapter is not called The Answers. It's called The Training, or The Practice. And the questioner is a bodhisattva, a lay bodhisattva called Vajrapala. And the person who's asking is the Buddha. So it's a conversation between Vajrapala and the Buddha. I think that's all I'll tell you because you'll hear it in a moment anyway. So that's all I'll tell you about the text. The reading of it. So this is something that we don't really do very much in our particular movement, in our tradition. We do quite a lot of meditation, we do a lot of talking about texts and studying them. But we don't really listen very much to them. So in the very, very early days of Buddhism there were no texts. It was an completely oral tradition for a few hundred years. But then with the rise of the Mahayana, 300, 400, 500 years after the death of Buddha, these texts were actually written down. But still, not many people could read. So one of the problems I think Westerners have, modern, contemporary Western Buddhists, with Buddhist texts in general, and the Mahayana text in particular, is you might think, oh, I'm going to read a Mahayana text. So you buy one, or you get one at the library, and you take it home, and you sit in your armchair, and you try to read it like you read other books, you know, like a novel or a book on science or something. You expect to be able to read it like that, and after a few pages, you think, what's going on? You know, you just can't really follow it. You don't know what's happening. And there are a number of reasons for that kind of sense of puzzlement and frustration, I think, when people first begin to read, especially Mahayana texts. There's a massive gulf in culture. So the way we read is very different from the way people would have read. In fact, most people around the time that this sutra was written would not have been able to read. So, and even those people who did read probably didn't read silently. You know, reading silently to yourself is quite a modern thing. Do you remember reading, or have you got any children who are learning to read? They read out loud, don't they? They say the words out loud. That's how people used to read. They used to declaim. And it's only fairly recently that people have begun to read silently. So it's become a kind of silent and solitary pursuit. But these texts weren't really meant for that solitary, silent way. They were shared. It was a collective thing. So in the context of a ritual, these texts would be declaimed by somebody, and most people would be listening to them. So it's a listening experience rather than a reading one. So that's the first thing. But also, as I say, there are other cultural leaps. They refer to beings and ideas which we don't know what they are. It's, you know, like when you try to read a Shakespeare play, if you're not used to that kind of thing, after a while you think, what's he on about? You can't quite understand the language, don't know what he's referring to, who he's referring to. So it's a similar kind of thing here, but in a way worse, because at least Shakespeare came from this country, and whoever wrote this text, it's a long, long way away. Now, I don't know if this text was originally written in Sanskrit. I suspect it was, so probably somewhere in India. But this particular version of it, and that's another thing with Mahayana Sutras, there are different versions of them. There are probably 6, 7, 8 different versions of this text. And this one is, it says translated from the Sanskrit to the Chinese, but this one has been translated from the Chinese into English. So now you've got this, now we're 2 steps away. Now, the early texts, what I call the Pali texts, although they were a bit repetitive, they're repetitive because they were never written down in the first place. They were written down later. They're kind of records of spoken conversation. And a lot of it's repetitive because people had to try to remember this conversation. So they remembered it by repeating things over and over and over again. So you get this, what some people find very frustrating and irritating repetition in those early texts. You don't get quite the same in the Sanskrit because the Sanskrit were written down. Now, Mahayana texts, 300, 400, 500 years after the time of the Buddha. The Buddha was kind of down to earth. He was a man. He spoke to people in their language. He used similes and metaphors that people would understand. But everything was done on the human level, as it were, in this world. Yeah? Mahayana texts, they opened out the whole thing, and they kind of put everything within a vast cosmic context. So everything that happens within the whole universe. That's one of the things that Mahayana did. So you get this tremendous idea of space in them, vast quantities of space, tracts of space, and they talk about different world systems living in different parts of the universe. You'll hear some of this later on, and I'll talk more about this later on. And vast tracts of time, unimaginable periods of time. So it's all happening in this massive, almost unimaginable kind of context. And one of the reasons for that is to get us out of our quotidian world, get us out of the everyday, humdrum, mundane kind of world that we often usually occupy, up into this massive kind of context. Somebody once said, and I really like this, they said that Mahayana Sutras, when you listen to them, you shouldn't think. Yeah? So what do we do, contemporary Westerners, when we hear a Buddhist text or when we read a Buddhist text, our conceptual mind is involved. The Buddha said this, is this true? Is it true in every sense? No, I think it is true of me actually. You're kind of conceptualizing, and it's often written in quite conceptual terms. Mahayana texts have concepts, but they're not really meant to be thought about very much. Whoever wrote these Mahayana Sutras, they take it for granted that you know your Buddhism already. You know your Dharma. You know it. You know the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths and the 5 spiritual faculties and so on. You know all that. So we don't need to go over that ground over and over again. You've done all that. Yeah? We're doing something else now. And I say that because these Mahayana texts, they just mention those things. They just mention the Eightfold Path and the 7 Bodhisanttva's. They don't explain them because they expect you to know them. So you've done all that groundwork. And there's no need to do that again. You've done that already. So now what they do is they make a point, and now you want to go to another point, don't you? Okay, I've got that. Understood that. Can we go on to another point now? No. No, you can't go on to another point. I'm going to make the point again, and again, and again. And some people find this really irritating. It just goes on for, sometimes pages, not this evening, but a paragraph or 2 on the same point, but just goes on and on and on, making the same point over and over again in slightly different language. And you think, why? I got it the first time you said it. But the Mahayana text is saying to you, no, you didn't. You think you've got it, but you only got it up here. You haven't got it down here. So I'm going to say it again now. No, you still haven't got it. You think you've got it, but you haven't got it. So I'm going to say it again. And I'm going to keep on saying it until you give up, until you surrender. So Mahayana texts, what they do is they almost bludgeon you into surrendering. At first, your conceptual mind is trying to get it all, but it's too much. It's too much, and after a while you go, oh, I just can't listen anymore to this. And now the text begins to do its work. Your conceptual mind has given up, it's got out of the way, and now the text can go inside. So that's how they work. So listening to a Mahayana text, if you think of it as a meditation, that's probably the best way of thinking about it. You do the mindfulness of breathing. Breathe in, you breathe out. Then you breathe in again, and you breathe out again. And again. Nobody complains about that. Same old breath, coming in, going out. How many times do you breathe in a mindfulness of breathing? 30-minute mindfulness of breathing. Loads and loads of times. You don't complain about that. So, with the Mahayana text, the point's going to be made over and over and over again. Just like the breath. Coming in, going out. Going in, going out. And your job is to get out of the way of that text. Your job is to allow the conceptual mind to stop, to get out of the way of what the text is trying to do, because the conceptual work has all been done beforehand. Now the text is trying to get deep inside you and say, okay, you've got it all conceptually now, you know the Four Noble Truths and all that stuff, right? But you haven't really got it yet. So the Mahayana text is trying to go deep inside you. And it just does that by doing it over and over and over again. Yeah? Until you give up and let it happen. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. Right, with my glasses. So what we'll do is we'll meditate for a short period, then I'll ring the bell. I should have practiced this. Always practice ringing the bell before you ring it. That's a Mahayana bell. We'll do a short meditation, and then I'll read the first chapter, and then I'll stop. We'll do another short meditation, and then I'll read the second chapter. If your mind wanders, just bring it back, just like you did with the mindfulness of reading, over and over again, bring your mind back again and again and again. And then at the end of the second chapter, I'll leave a short space, and then I'm going to start a chant. The chapter is towards the end, all about Amitabha Buddha. This is actually Amitabha Buddha. Amita means measureless, and Abha means light, so the Buddha of measureless light. And I'll begin a mantra. Now you won't have heard this mantra before, so you need to listen to it before you join in, make sure you've got it. And there's 4 different tunes to it. So a tune for the first mantra, a tune for the second, and so on. Now the second tune, this is important, it's only got 2 notes in it. And the third tune is a variation on that. Now what people often do is they do the variation for the second one, but you're not supposed to. Just 2 notes for the second tune of the Amitabha mantra. See if you can remember that. Okay, so I'm not going to sort of come piling in with it. I'm going to start it quite quietly. You may not even hear me at first. And then after a while, you'll begin to hear me. And then when you think you've got it, then just join me and we'll chant that from there. Chapter 1, the questions. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was in the Karanda Bamboo garden of the city of Ratnaguna, together with an innumerable multitude of great bodhisattvas, bhikshus, bhikshunis, upasikas and upasikas, as well as gods, dragons, ashuras, yakshas, garudas, kimnaras and maharajas. All were seated in the huge assembly. At that time, the bodhisattva Bhadrapala rose from his seat, arranged his robe, and fell on his knees. He joined his palms and asked the Buddha, "I would like to ask some questions. May I have your permission to ask them now?" The Buddha replied, "Very good. Ask any questions as you wish. I will answer them for you." Bhadrapala asked the Buddha, "What dharmas should bodhisattvas practice in order to develop wisdom as immense as the ocean? What should they do in order to acquire broad knowledge and understand what they have heard without doubts? What should they do in order to know their past lives and whence they have come to be reborn? What should they do in order to live a long life? What should they do in order to be reborn into a family with a great name and to be loved and respected by their parents, siblings, relatives and friends? What should they do in order to be endowed with even, comely features? What should they do in order to acquire excellent talents, to be outstanding in the multitudes, and to develop superb, all-encompassing wisdom? What should they do in order to acquire the merit and wisdom required for Buddhahood, to achieve immeasurable, awesome power, and to adorn their magnificent Buddha lands? What should they do in order to subjugate hostile maras? What should they do in order to achieve command, so that their vows will never fail? What should they do in order to enter the door of total retention? What should they do in order to acquire the transcendental powers to travel to Buddha lands everywhere? What should they do in order to acquire the bold valour of a lion, with nothing to fear, unmovable by maras? What should they do in order to realise their Buddha nature and to accept and uphold the Dhamma in the sutras with understanding, not forgetting anything? What should they do in order to achieve self-fulfillment, free from sycophancy and flattery, and unattached to the three realms of existence? What should they do in order to be free from hindrances and to acquire the overall wisdom knowledge, never deviating from the Buddha's intention? What should they do in order to win people's trust? What should they do in order to acquire the 8 tones of a Buddha and sound 10,000 koti tones? What should they do in order to acquire the sublime appearance of a Buddha? What should they do in order to acquire the power of all hearing? What should they do in order to acquire the divine eye to see into the future? What should they do in order to acquire the 10 powers and true wisdom? What should they do in order to see, in a single thought, Buddhas from worlds in the 10 directions, all standing before them? What should they do in order to know that the 4 appearances of every Dharma have no reality? What should they do in order to see in this world innumerable Buddha lands in the 10 directions, and to know the good and evil life journeys of the people, gods, dragons, spirits, and wriggly insects in those lands? These are my questions. I pray that the Buddha will explain to me and resolve all my doubts. The Buddha told Bhadrapala, "Very good. Your questions are so comprehensive that they are beyond measure. You can ask these questions because you have acquired merit in your past lives under past Buddhas, because you have made offerings to Buddhas, delighted in the Dharma in the sutras, observed your precepts, and lived in purity. Because you have always begged for food, not accepting meal invitations, convened assemblies of bodhisattvas, taught people to stop doing evil, and seen the equality of all. And because you have always had great loving kindness and great compassion, your merit is beyond measure." The Buddha told Bhadrapala, there is a samadhi called the meditation in which the Buddhas of the present all stand before one. If you can practice this meditation, you will have the answers to all your questions. Bhadrapala said to the Buddha, "Please teach it. If you were to teach it now, many would be set free. It will give peace to sentient beings in worlds in the 10 directions and provide great illumination to bodhisattvas." Chapter 2, the training. The Buddha told Bhadrapala, if bodhisattvas aspire to attain this samadhi quickly, they should stand in great faith. Those who train themselves in accordance with the Dharma can attain this samadhi. Do not raise any doubts, even as slight as a hair. This Dharma of concentrated mind is also called the Bodhisattva way, supporting all other ways. Then the Buddha spoke in verse. With a single thought, believe in this Dharma. Following the teachings heard, think only of one object. Keep only one thought, ceasing all other thoughts. Stand firm in your faith, without any doubts. Progress energetically, never negligent or indolent. Think of neither existence nor non-existence, neither progress nor regress. Think of neither front nor back, neither left nor right. Think of neither non-existence nor existence, neither far nor near. Think of neither pain nor itch, neither hunger nor thirst. Think of neither cold nor hot, neither pain nor pleasure. Think of neither birth nor old age, neither illness nor death. Think of neither body nor life nor longevity. Think of neither wealth nor poverty, neither nobility nor lowliness. Think of neither sense objects nor desires. Think of neither large nor small, neither long nor short. Think of neither beauty nor ugliness. Think of neither evil nor good, neither anger nor delight. Think of neither rising nor sitting, neither proceeding nor stopping. Think of neither the sutras nor the Dhamma. Think of neither right nor wrong, neither grasping nor abandoning. Think of neither perception nor consciousness. Think of neither cessation nor continuation. Think of neither emptiness nor true reality. Think of neither heavy nor light, neither hard nor easy. Think of neither deep nor shallow, neither broad nor narrow. Think of neither father nor mother, neither wife nor children. Think of neither friends nor acquaintances, neither love nor hatred. Think of neither gain nor loss, neither success nor failure. Think of neither clarity nor turbidity. Cease all thoughts and be vigilant for a given period of time, never distracted. Progress energetically, never negligent or indolent. Do not count the years, nor feel tired in a single day. Hold one thought, never losing it. Avoid sleep and keep the mind alert. Always live alone and avoid gatherings. Shun evil ones, but stay near beneficent friends. Serve illuminated teachers, regarding them as Buddhas. Hold firm your resolve, but always be gentle. Meditate on the equality of all things. Avoid your hometown and keep away from relatives. Abandon love and desire and live in purity. Meditate on that which is uncompounded and cease desires. Drop distracting thoughts and learn the way of absorption. Gain wisdom from words in accord with jhana. Remove the 3 afflictions and purify the 6 faculties. Cease lustful pursuits and leave sensory pleasures behind. Do not be greedy for wealth or accumulate things. Know contentment in eating, and do not covet flavours. Take care never to eat any sentient being. Dress in accordance with the Dharma, and do not be ornately adorned. Do not tease others, nor be proud or arrogant. Do not be conceited, nor elevate yourself. Expound sutras in accordance with the Dharma. Understand that the body has always been like an illusion. Do not be engrossed by the 5 aggregates, nor revel in the 12 sensory fields. The 5 aggregates are like thieves, and the 4 domains are like snakes. All are impermanent, and all are unstable. Recognise that there has never been an everlasting ruler in you. Only convergence and divergence of causes and conditions. Understand and know that nothing in existence is substantial. Bestow loving kindness and sympathy on all. Give alms to the poor and relief to the unfortunate. This is meditative concentration in the Bodhisattva way, which will unfold the fundamental wisdom and elicit myriads of wisdom knowledge. The Buddha told Bhadrapala, one who trains in this way will attain the samadhi in which the Buddhas of the present all stand before one. If, among bhikshus, bhikshunis, Vipasikas and Vipasikas, there are those who want to train according to this Dharma, they should fully observe their precepts and live alone in a place to think of Amitabha Buddha, who now is in the West. According to the teachings heard, one should also think of his land called Sukhavati, the land of bliss, which is 10 million Koti Buddha lands away from here. One should single-mindedly contemplate for 1 day and 1 night, or even 7 days and 7 nights. After the 7th day, you will see him. By analogy, one sees things in a dream, not knowing whether it is day or night, indoors or outdoors, and one's sight is impervious to darkness or obstructions. Bhadrapala, bodhisattvas should do this contemplation. Then, huge mountains, Sumeru mountains, and dark places in the intervening Buddha lands will all fall away, not posing any obstruction. These bodhisattvas will see across without having the divine eye, hear across without having the divine ear, and travel to that Buddha land without possessing transcendental powers. It is not that they have died here and been reborn there, but that they can sit here and see everything there. As an analogy, a man hears that in the kingdom of Vaishali lives a prostitute named Sumana. The second man hears of a prostitute called Amrapali. And the third man hears that Utpalavana has become a prostitute. These 3 men have never seen those 3 women, but they have heard of them, and their lust is ignited. They all live in Rajagriha, and they have lustful thoughts concurrently. Each of them goes in a dream to the woman he thinks of and spends the night with her. When they wake up, they all remember their own dreams. The Buddha told Bhadrapala, the three women I have mentioned serve as an analogy. The Buddha said, Bodhisattvas in this land can see Amitabha by thinking intently only of him. When they see him, they can ask, what Dharma should I uphold in order to be born in your land? Amitabha Buddha will reply, those who wish to be reborn in my land should think of my name. If they can continue without rest, they will succeed in being reborn here. The Buddha said, because of intense thinking, one will be reborn there. One should always think of Amitabha Buddha's body with the 32 physical marks and the 80 excellent characteristics, unequalled in its majesty, radiating vast, bright light to illuminate everywhere. He teaches in the assembly of bodhisattvas and bhikshus that dharmas, in true reality, are empty and therefore indestructible. Why? Because indestructible are all dharmas, such as form, pain, itch, thinking, perception, birth, death, consciousness, spirit, earth, water, fire, wind, the human world, and the heaven world, including the great Brahma heaven. By thinking of a Buddha, one attains the samadhi of emptiness. As an analogy, one travels to a distant land and thinks of family and kin in one's hometown. In a dream, one returns home, sees one's family and relatives, and enjoys talking to them. After waking, one tells one's dream to friends. The Buddha said, if bodhisattvas hear of a Buddha's name and wish to see him, they will be able to see him by constantly thinking of him and his land. For example, a bhikshu visualizes before him the bones of a corpse turning blue, white, red, or black. The colours are not brought by anyone, but are imagined by his mind. Likewise, by virtue of Buddha's awesome spiritual power, bodhisattvas who skillfully abide in this samadhi can see, as they wish, a Buddha of any land. Why? Because they are able to see him by virtue of three powers: the power of Buddhas, the power of the samadhi, and the power of their own merits. As an analogy, a handsome young man dressed in fine clothes wants to see his own face. He can see his reflection by looking into a hand mirror, pure oil, clear water, or a crystal. Does his reflection come from the outside into the mirror, oil, water, or crystal? Bhadrapala replied, no, it does not. It is because of the clarity of the mirror, oil, water, or crystal that the man can see his reflection. His reflection comes from neither the inside nor the outside. The Buddha said, very good, Bhadrapala. When the forms are clear, everything is clear. Likewise, if one wishes to see a Buddha, one with a pure mind will be able to see him. When one sees him, one can ask questions, and he will give a reply. Having heard the teachings, one will rejoice greatly and think, where does this Buddha come from? And where am I going? As I think of this Buddha, he comes from nowhere, and I am going nowhere. The three realms, the realm of desire, the realm of form, and the realm of the formless. These three realms are simply made by thought. Whatever I think, that I see. The mind creates the Buddha. The mind itself sees him. The mind is the Buddha. The mind is the Tathagata. The mind is my body. The mind sees the Buddha. The mind does not know mind. The mind does not see the mind. The mind with conceptions is samsara. The mind without conceptions is nirvana. There is nothing in these dharmas which can be enjoyed. If thinking is nothing but empty, then anything which is thought is utterly non-existent. So it is, Bhadravana. Such is the vision of the bodhisattvas who abide in this samadhi. Then the Buddha spoke in verse. The mind does not know mind. With mind, one cannot see mind. Mind giving rise to conceptions is samsara. Free of conceptions, it is nirvana. There is nothing fixed or firm in these dharmas. They are forever located in thinking. When one understands emptiness, one is altogether free of conceptual thinking. So, what we did earlier was you heard the first two chapters of this text, the Sutra of the Prachupana Buddha, Samukkhāvastita Samadhi. So, let me just say a little bit and try to explain a little bit about where it's all come from and the context. So, it's a Mahayana text. How many of you know what the Mahayana is? Put your hands up. So some of you don't. Okay, so Mahayana. It means the great way or the vast way. Yana, it means way, or sometimes it's translated as vehicle, but I prefer way. And Maha means great. Now Maha doesn't just mean great as in big, huge, but it also has a sense of wisdom about it. So Maha means very wise as well as very big. So the Mahayana is the vast way, the great way to enlightenment. And Mahayana Buddhism grew up 300, 400, 500 years after the time of the Buddha. I make it sound like it's a school, don't I? But actually lots of different schools. And they've been put under the same rubric of this term Mahayana. So what we were listening to there was a fusion of two schools. One is Pure Land Buddhism, and the other is Perfection of Wisdom. So the Perfection of Wisdom is quite intellectual. Were you still awake at the end there? When I was talking, the Buddha said, when the forms are clear, everything is clear. One with a pure mind will be able to see when one sees. Where does this Buddha come from and where am I going? As I think of the Buddha, he comes from nowhere and I'm going nowhere. Do you remember that whole section? It's the bits of like, what's he on about? That's perfection of wisdom type stuff. But the whole devotion to Amitabha is Pure Land. So you get these two things. You get this strong imaginal devotion element to Amitabha, plus this quite intellectual kind of taking apart what's happening. So you've been asked to visualise this Buddha, and then you also there's this dialogue about the fact, well, what's that mean? What's that Buddha? Who is he? Where's he coming from? Etc. So it's very interesting. I'll come on to that in a bit. But anyway, Mahayana Buddhism, 400 or 500 years after the Buddha, and you get these sutras, they're called Vaipulya sutras. Vaipulya means great, extended. So they're very, very long. The early sutras from the Buddha, from the Pali Canon, I mean, at most they're 6-7 pages. Usually, sometimes they're only a page or half a page. But the Mahayana Sutras go on for pages and pages and pages, like hundreds of pages. And as I said earlier, what the Mahayana did, they take for granted all the early teachings of the Buddha. They've got no problem with any of it, it's fine, it's good. But you know it now. That's their take on it. You know it now. Now we're going to take that into this vast universe and try and understand it in its cosmic context. So, we've been talking about Buddhas, haven't we? Buddhas in the plural. And in the early days, when there was the Buddha, there was only one Buddha. There was just the Buddha. A man lived 2,500 years ago somewhere in northeast India, and he was it. That was it. That was the whole thing. It was just the Buddha. No talk of any other Buddhas whatsoever. There was just him, the Buddha. And Buddha means the awakened one, the awake. So he was the one who was awake. And he was teaching people. And he said, you can become awake too. And many of them did. But they didn't become Buddhas. Buddha is a special honorific title for the person who did it first, who found the way first. So he's the Buddha. And all the people who gained enlightenment around him were called arahants. Yeah? Now, the Buddha said many times, the enlightenment of a Buddha and the enlightenment of an arahant is the same. I mean, there's no difference. The only difference is that the Buddha got there first. Yeah. But, you know, that's quite a thing, isn't it, for the Buddha to do it before anybody else had done it. What an amazing thing to do. So, very special. And the Buddha's very special. Soon after his death came this legend that actually he was one in a line of Buddhas. There were Buddhas before him, actually. And first of all, they came up with these 7 Buddhas before the Buddha. And the previous Buddha, the Buddha previous to our Buddha, Kasi, he lived like an unimaginably long time ago. Like so long ago, you wouldn't be able to even imagine that period of time. So they've got this idea of cosmic ages, kalpas. So a kalpa is a cosmic age. Sometimes it's translated as an aeon. And how long is that actually? Well, it's a rather uncertain length, but you have to imagine a rock a mile square, a cube, yeah, a mile each way. And you have to imagine a goddess coming down from the heavens every 100 years with a piece of silk, Benares silk it has to be, and she just strokes that great big bit of rock once and goes back up again. Then 100 years later she comes back and strokes it again with a piece of silk. How long would it take that mile cube rock to be worn down by that piece of silk? You don't need to answer that question. A very, very long time. In fact, you can't really imagine that, can you? So, a few of those ago was the Buddha Vipassana. So we're not talking about history here. So now you've got these 7 previous Buddhas, or maybe 6 previous Buddhas, 7 including the Buddha, because 7 is a kind of magic number, isn't it? Then you've got 7 Buddhas. And then later on, they came up with an idea of, I think, 15, and then 24, and I think you get 50 odd. So you get this idea of Buddhas stretching way, 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 way back. And then, of course, you've got the future. So now they came up with this idea of a Buddha in the future, and he's called Maitreya, or he will be called Maitreya. And he's just waiting in some heaven, waiting to be reborn as a Buddha somewhere. So now you've got this idea of, in time, Buddhas stretching way back into the past and way into the future. You've got that. But then, later on, now, all that time, they said you can only have one Buddha at a time. You can't have more than one Buddha at a time. But that's only so in one world system. What's the world system? The world system is more or less something like a galaxy. So you can only get one Buddha in a galaxy at any one time. There are lots of galaxies. So this is where the Mahayana really came into its own. It began to imagine the universe, made up of multiple, innumerable, countless galaxies going off in every direction. And some of those galaxies have Buddhas in them, and some don't. So there are galaxies all over the universe with Buddhas in them, yeah, who we can worship and bow down to and chant their name like we did earlier. These Buddhas existing everywhere. What on earth does all this mean? And why? Why do it? Why not just have the Buddha in India teaching? I don't really know the answer to that. But anyway, they did. The question for us, I suppose, the question we really want to ask is, do we need to take all this literally? This idea of Buddhas everywhere. What does it actually mean to us? Personally, I don't believe there are Buddhas everywhere in the universe. Might as well just tell you. I just don't believe that. That there's a Buddha called Amitabha living trillions of galaxies away in the West with his own Buddha land called Sukhavati, the land of bliss. I just don't believe that on a literal level. But I'm an Amitabha devotee. I'm writing a book about the Amitabha Sutras at the moment. So, how does that work? Who's heard of John Hick? Put your hands up if you've heard of John Hick. Have you met him?
No.
No? He used to live in Birmingham before he died. Yeah, great man. American.
Oh, I did meet him.
And he was a devout Christian, but he was also a philosopher of religion. Very, very good. He's got a website, John Hick, just fantastic writings. But one of the things that really helped me is one of his teachings, which is, he called it turning the critical realist key. So, let's take this idea of Buddhas everywhere. And in the sutra, there's this idea of Amitabha. You visualize him, and then you end up having a conversation with this Buddha. And the Buddha actually speaking to you and giving you teachings, right? So, how are we to take that? Well, there's the naive realist interpretation. Now, the naive realist interpretation is to believe it at face value, that there really is a Buddha called Amitabha, lives a trillion Buddha fields over in the West, and he was talking to me yesterday. Yeah. That's the naive realist view. The non-realist view is, what a rubbish. Yeah. That didn't happen at all. Come on, you're hallucinating. It's just a big hallucination. You need to go see a doctor. That's the non-realist view. The critical realist view, and I'm a critical realist, is I don't believe that there's this Buddha called Amitabha that came and spoke to you, but I do believe something happened. Something really significant happened to you there. You've interpreted it in these terms. I interpret it differently, but I'm with you. Something really important happened there. You had a spiritual experience. Do you get the idea? Yeah. So you've got this idea of many Buddhas. Now, what's it all mean? What is the critical realist interpretation of that? Ah. There's a book here called The Dawn of Chinese Pure Land Buddhist Doctrine by Kenneth Tanaka. He's a scholar. It says something very interesting here, which I'm just going to read to you. So he's talking about Buddha realms, or Buddha fields, or Buddha worlds, Buddha lands. And the idea is that each Buddha has his own field, his own land. And he's almost like the ruler of that land. He teaches the Dharma there. So you've got these Buddha fields all over the universe. So he says, instead, the concept of Buddha realm, Buddha field, may provide a more likely doctrinal explanation for the emergence of these contemporary Buddhas. Under this view, the Buddhist cosmos is not an objective and material, but a subjective and spiritual reality. Phew. I'll repeat that. Under this view, the Buddhist cosmos is not an objective and material, but a subjective and spiritual reality. The transcendent Buddhas, that's what he calls these Buddhas all over the place, the transcendent Buddhas and their realms that fill the universe are concretized expressions of the eternal Buddha principle, Dhamma, which, as the basic reality of the universe, is ever active to lead all beings to enlightenment. Remember, the critical realist is not the non-realist. The critical realist isn't saying that's a load of rubbish, they're just interpreting it in another way. So Buddhas and Buddha realms are not helpful completely. They do mean something. So what do they mean? Yeah. What are these Buddhas? And what are these Buddha realms? Well, Kenneth Sanaka uses this phrase, the Buddha principle in the universe. And then he puts in parentheses, Dharma. So, I'm very fond of saying that the Buddha didn't teach anything which other people aren't able to see with their own eyes. Yeah. Actually, he did, didn't he? Because he taught rebirth as well, and we can't really see that. But when he's talking about this world, he doesn't teach anything which is very, very difficult to understand, very arcane, esoteric. He just says things like, everything's impermanent. And there is suffering. And there's no core to anything. There's no sort of fixed core to anything. It's very simple to understand, really. But we just don't get it. So, ignorance is ignorance. There's a sense of denial. So, we don't want to know. We don't really want to know. As Buddhists, we kind of want to know, but we also kind of don't want to know. It's that dual thing, isn't it? Tell me more. Oh, that's enough. So that's what happens, isn't it, with us? Because the truth is difficult to take. Let's take the truth of impermanence. Everything's impermanent. Yeah, okay, right. Well, that includes you, of course. Oh. Yeah, I'm impermanent. Yeah, radically impermanent. So what that means is that eventually I'm going to get, well, I am old already. I've got there already. And the next thing, of course, is death, isn't it? The next thing is death. So to really understand impermanence is to really take on board the fact of old age and death. And that's a difficult one to do. It's difficult. But it's totally obvious. It's totally obvious. You just have to look around. Look around our movement. It's mainly older people these days, isn't it? I go to an order weekend these days, it's just a bunch of old guys sitting around. Old men with grizzled hair and grey and, you know, we're just a bunch of old guys. We're just getting on. So the Buddhist truths are very, 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 very simple to understand. In fact, it's almost as if truth is knocking at your door and saying, hey, wake up. And that's what I think the Buddha principle, he talks about as an active principle, doesn't he? Which is quite interesting, an active principle. So, if Buddha Amitabha represents reality, he's not a passive reality. He's not just sitting there looking at you going, don't you understand yet? He's trying to get you to understand. So the idea of these Buddhas in all the different directions of the universe, the way I take it is, it's a mythical way of saying reality is everywhere. Everything is real. If only I could really see it as it is, I'd be a Buddha. And it's as if, sometimes you feel this, don't you? Well, I'm saying I don't know if you do or not, but you go on retreat, you meditate quite a bit, and then you go out to the garden one day, between meditations, and you're enjoying the countryside, but it's as if the countryside around you is impinging upon you. It's as if it's trying to say, look, everything's real, can't you see it? It's as if the universe is trying to get you to see it. Anybody had that experience? Well, that's good. Yeah. So that's what I think the idea of all these Buddhas really represents. They symbolise reality impinging on our small lives, because a lot of the time we're so caught up with our own life, our own quotidian, everyday life. I mean, is that another question?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
So, often what you hear is that Buddha says everything is illusionary, that everything's an illusion. And is that the opposite of everything is really real?
No, the Buddha didn't say everything is an illusion. That's a Hindu teaching.
Okay.
The Buddha said everything is real, but you're deluded about it. There's nothing illusory in the world whatsoever. Everything is just as it is. Everything is tathagata. Did you get that earlier when the Buddha is also tathagata? Tathagata means this, thus. You know, so if someone to ask you, if you were a Buddha and I asked you, what, you know, how are things? You'd go, thus. This is it. There's no more to be done. This is the reality. So there's no illusion, there's deluded people. It's a very big difference between them.
So just what we think about it?
Well, it's the way we habitually view the world, isn't it? Yeah, we habitually view it like that. But the world is just carrying on in its real way, regardless. Yeah. 9:25. I haven't got to the text yet, have we? Let's just have a little look at a bit of the text, shall we, and see if we can make any sense of it whatsoever. Which bit should we look at? Any requests? Let's go to the very end, because it's not that I particularly understand it, but it's good just to look at it and see if we can get our heads around it a little bit. So he was talking about seeing the Buddha. Oh yeah, then he says this. Bodhisattvas who skillfully abide in this samadhi, this meditation, can see, as they wish, a Buddha of any land. Why? Because they are able to see him by virtue of three powers. The power of the Buddhas, the power of samadhi, and the power of their own merit. Now this is very interesting because it's an inversion of the threefold way. Who knows the threefold way? Threefold path. I'm glad you do. Okay, so it begins with ethics, yeah, sila. Then it goes on to samadhi, meditation, and then wisdom, right? You've got those three. But you start with sila, you become ethically pure, that allows you to meditate effectively, and then through your meditation you begin to see deeply into things, and then you gain wisdom. So that's how it goes, very simple. This is inverted. So let's take it backwards. The power of their own merit gained by acting skillfully. The power of the samadhi, their meditation, and the power of the Buddhas. So the power of the Buddhas takes the place of wisdom. Yeah. Now, in early Buddhism, wisdom is something that you got. You did it. You thought your way into it and you realised yourself. Yeah? You did all the requisite practices and so on, and you gained wisdom. But in this form of Buddhism, the wisdom was bestowed on you by the power of the Buddhas. Because the wisdom that you gain is the realisation of no self, is it not? You realise that actually all this time there's been no self. That means there is no other. Yeah? There's no self, there's also no other. If you don't exist as a fixed, separate being, then no one else does either. So now there's no self and there's no other. So let's see what we can make of the next bit. As an analogy, a handsome young man dressed in fine clothes wants to see his own face. It's lovely this, because it goes right back to a very basic kind of a young man wants to look at himself. How do I know? He can see his reflection by looking into a hand mirror, pure oil, clear water, or a crystal. So then comes the question. Does his reflection come from outside into the mirror, the oil, the water, and the crystal? And Bhattakala replied, no, it doesn't. It's because the mirror, or the oil, or the water, or the crystal are very reflective, they're very clear, that the man can see his reflection. His reflection actually doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't come from the outside, it doesn't come from the inside. Yeah? So you imagine a pond, very clear pond, and there's no ripples on it. You look down into it and you see your face on the surface, yeah? But you can also see beyond the surface, can't you, by just changing the way, yeah? You can look down to the pebbles, or you can see the reflection. Have you ever done that? You can either see the reflection or you can change your
focus.
Hmm? Focus. And you can see, you can do one or the other. Where's the face? Yeah. It's not coming from underneath, is it, from the pebbles? Yeah. It's just there on the very surface of the water. So it's not really coming from anywhere. The Buddha said, very good. So the Buddha agreed with him, so he must be right. When the forms are clear, everything is clear. Likewise, if you want to see the Buddha, a Buddha, one with a pure mind will be able to see. When one sees him, one can ask questions. He will give a reply. So, for us critical realists, what's going on here? Who's replying? Who's replying? But remember, we've gone beyond self and other now. Yeah? So, if there's no self and there's no other, having heard the teachings, one will rejoice greatly and think, where does this Buddha come from? And where am I going? It's a really interesting question. Where does the Buddha come from? You've got this great devotion to this Buddha. And you've asked him questions and he's teaching you the Dharma. But you're asking about the status now of this Buddha. Where does this Buddha come from, actually? Is this Buddha really a being? But then you ask the same of yourself. Well, if I can ask that of the Buddha, I can ask that of me. Where do I come from? What or who am I? What's the difference? As I think of this Buddha, he comes from nowhere, and I'm going nowhere. Self and other. There's no self, there's no other. That's just the conceptual way we kind of understand our experience. But if there's no self and there's no other, how would you experience the world? How would you experience life? How would you experience other people? There is no self, there is no other. Whatever I think, that I see. The mind creates the Buddha. It's quite a thing to say, isn't it? The mind creates the Buddha. The mind itself sees him. The mind is the Buddha. Now this surely is a very important phrase. The mind is the Buddha. The mind is the Tathagata, the thus come on. The mind is my body. Don't know where that comes from. Suddenly, the mind is my body. The mind sees the Buddha. The mind does not know the mind. The mind does not see the mind. The mind with conceptions is samsara, the world. The mind without conceptions is nirvana, awakening.
Which part of this is specifically Pure Land Buddhism?
Well, Pure Land Buddhism is a funny title, it's a funny term really. It's really, that came from China. It's what the Chinese began to call the text that's associated with Amitabha Buddha, because his Buddha field is called Sukhavati, which actually means the happy land, not the pure land. But it is a pure Buddha field. So they began to call these texts pure, his land, the happy land. They began to call it the pure land. So any texts that are to do with Amitabha and his Buddha field are usually called Pure Land. And a whole number of schools in China and Japan grew up around these texts. This is not the most important one of them. There are another three that are probably considered to be more important. But of all Buddhists, how can I put this? There are more Pure Land Buddhists in the world than any other denomination of Buddhism. Because China and Japan. China, big country. And most Buddhists in China will be Pure Land Buddhists. So they have this tremendous devotion to Amitabha. Maybe I should end with Buddha beyond the Buddha, because that's what the title of this whole thing is, isn't it? The Buddha beyond the Buddha. And I got this idea, this phrase, from Ratnaguna, my teacher, who was musing on what is all this about Amitabha? Why Amitabha? Because when you read the text, you can't help feeling that the Amitabha seems to be more important than the Buddha, because the Buddha's teaching it. The Buddha's teaching people to have devotion to Amitabha. It's almost like the Buddha becomes a messenger to tell you about another Buddha. This is the real Buddha over here. This is the one you should. So why? What's that mean? So Bhante began to think that it's almost like Amitabha is the Buddha beyond the Buddha. Now what does that mean? What does it mean to have a Buddha beyond the Buddha? Very, very quickly now, so then I'll finish, because I've got an ending now. Very quickly. Soon after the Buddha's enlightenment, he wanted someone that he could revere. Gaurava was the word. He was looking around the universe, as it were, looking around someone he could look up to and revere and honour and respect. And after a while he was disappointed. There was no one more enlightened than he was. No one he could look up to. So then he thought, well, I'll honour and revere the Dharma then. I'll respect and look up to the Dharma. So that's what he did. Now, a question arises here. If the Buddha honours and looks up to the Dharma, that suggests, doesn't it, that the Dharma must be more than the Buddha. Now, there is a famous text where the Buddha says, he who sees me sees the Dharma, and he who sees the Buddha, he who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So, almost as if they're coterminous. But in this text, where he's looking up to the Dharma, there's a sense in which the Dharma is more than the Buddha. As if there's more than the Buddha was able to, even him, to realise. So that's very interesting. And Sangharakshana, my teacher, talks about enlightenment as not a fixed end point, but as that's as far as we can see from where we are. You know, horizon, the horizon. If you're in a ship and you look at the horizon, you're going towards the horizon, it keeps receding away from you. There's always something beyond the horizon which you cannot see. So this is the analogy that Sangharakshana uses. He says, well, enlightenment's the horizon, it's as far as you can see from where you are. But as you get closer to it, there's more and more and more. So even the Buddha didn't stop there. Because that would be weird, wouldn't it? Because life is all about movement. It would be funny if suddenly the Buddha became static. You know, I've made it. So even the Buddha's enlightenment continued to unfold, which meant that his enlightenment is not a fixed end point. So therefore, Amitabha symbolises the Dharma, which is even beyond what the Buddha was able to experience in his lifetime. And there's the end.